Imagine a war so massive, so devastating, that it engulfed almost the entire European continent and left millions dead in its wake. No, I'm not talking about World War I or II. This was over 100 years earlier. Welcome to the Napoleonic Wars, where one man's ambition reshaped the map of Europe and drenched it in blood. Let's rewind to the late 1700s. France had just gone through the chaos of the French Revolution. Heads were rolling, literally, and the monarchy was kaput. But while everyone else was trying to figure out what came next, along came Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was a military genius, a political mastermind, and, well, not a very tall guy. But don't let that fool you. This man had big dreams. By 1803, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France and decided Europe would look better with him in charge. Cue the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars were essentially France versus everybody else. Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and later even Spain and Portugal all teamed up at various points to stop Napoleon. Think of it like a really violent game of Risk, except with way fewer dice and way more bayonets. Napoleon didn't just march into battles, he stormed them. His armies were fast, organized, and carried a new sense of nationalism that terrified Europe's old-school monarchies. But what made these wars so bloody? For starters, the sheer scale. We're talking about massive armies, sometimes over 600,000 soldiers in a single campaign. And with battles like Austerlitz, Borodino, and Waterloo, the casualties were staggering. Over the course of 12 years, an estimated 3.5 to 6 million people died. That's soldiers and civilians. Disease was a major killer too. Back then, the only thing more dangerous than Napoleon's army was a lack of hygiene. Dysentery, typhus, and other diseases killed more soldiers than musket balls ever did. And let's not forget the civilians caught in the crossfire. Entire towns were razed. Food supplies were looted and populations were displaced. War didn't just stay on the battlefield, it devastated everything in its path. Now, here's where Napoleon shines. In 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, he pulled off one of the most brilliant military victories in history. Facing two larger armies, Russia and Austria, Napoleon used deception and strategy to crush them. He was like the chess grandmaster of war, always thinking 10 moves ahead. By 1807, Napoleon controlled most of Europe. He even forced the Holy Roman Empire to dissolve. The guy was unstoppable, or so it seemed. Then came 1812, when Napoleon made the classic mistake of invading Russia. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. Napoleon marched into Russia with over 600,000 soldiers, one of the largest armies ever assembled. But the Russians had a sneaky strategy: scorched earth. They burned their own towns and crops, leaving Napoleon's army with nothing to eat. By the time winter hit, Napoleon's men were freezing, starving, and dropping like flies. Out of the 600,000 soldiers who marched in, fewer than 100,000 made it out. It was one of the worst military disasters in history. Napoleon's defeat in Russia emboldened his enemies. Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria formed the Sixth Coalition and started chipping away at his empire. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered another crushing defeat. By 1814, Paris fell and Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the island of Elba, but because he was Napoleon, he didn't stay put for long. In 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to France for one last hurrah. This period, known as the 100 Days, ended with the infamous Battle of Waterloo. Facing the Duke of Wellington and a coalition of forces, Napoleon was finally defeated. He was exiled again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena, where he lived out his days, plotting hypothetical comebacks. The Napoleonic Wars changed Europe forever. Borders were redrawn, monarchies were shaken, and the idea of nationalism took root. But the human cost was staggering. Millions dead, entire regions left in ruins, and a legacy of destruction that still echoes through history. Napoleon once said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." He certainly avoided obscurity, but at what cost? The Napoleonic Wars weren't just about one man's ambition. They were a testament to the devastating power of war and the fragility of empires. And hey, if you enjoyed this dive into history's bloodiest conflicts, subscribe. Don't worry, we won't demand tribute like Napoleon. Just a click will do.